And we're back on the Fowler Show. Every now and then, guys, you know we like to take it home a little bit and have some really enriching and deep conversations here on the Fowler Show. And today is no different. We're joined by a new good friend of mine, hopefully will be a good friend, of the Gay Christian Network. His name is Justin Lee. He is the founder and executive director. Welcome to the Fowler Show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thanks for being on with us. We really appreciate it. We know you have a busy schedule there. And, you know, I think we can just have a real conversation about what is sort of happening. But before we get to all of that stuff, right? Like, what is the Gay Christian Network?
We're a nonprofit organization that began originally back in 2001 as an online support group for Christians who were gay and later on Christians who were LGBT, lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender, who were wrestling with what it meant to be honest about what they were going through in terms of their sexuality or gender identity, but in the context of their faith. The organization has grown since then, so that now, in addition to providing that sort of support group element, we also do a lot of advocacy work in churches, in Christian groups around the world, basically to help Christians better talk about these issues. And we work with folks on both sides of the divide that exists in our culture around homosexuality and LGBT issues, to help folks talk to each other and have more productive dialogue, and ultimately to help the church be more of the gracious institution that I believe that it's called to be.
I love that. I think you're so right. When you talk about this ideal of, you know, gracious institution, I think, honestly, what seems to be missing here from the formula is this ideal, and I would like to get your take on this idea that what you hear from the sort of modern day mainstream Christian evangelical church, even though it's starting to change, is the ideal that God's love is some sort of conditional thing, right? And I think, you know, and I think if you read the Bible pretty clearly, it tends to say the opposite, that God's love is like completely and totally unconditional. And I think that sort of creates a schism that sort of exists in modern day culture where if you happen to be LGBT, you are automatically, they see you as sort of outside the realm of the Christian, outside the realm of being a Christian.
Yeah, and I don't think anyone intends for it to come across that way. I grew up Southern Baptist, and you know, to give you an idea, my nickname in high school was God Boy. I was the kid who was preaching at everybody else. I always had tracts in my backpack to, you know, tell everybody about salvation, and a Bible ready to pull out Bible passages, and so I said a lot of things that I now look back and realize came across as very hurtful and judgmental, but I didn't mean them that way at the time. I had been told growing up that people chose to be gay, that it was a sinful choice, and that it was my responsibility as a Christian to speak out against that. So I think there are a lot of Christians who believe that they're being loving when they say the kinds of things they say because they don't want people to go to hell. They don't want people to be separated from God. They want people to have the full life God has promised them. And so they believe that that means telling folks, hey, God didn't call you to be gay. But when I started to realize as a teenager that I was gay, and I hadn't chosen to be, and no program that I tried, no amount of prayer or therapy was causing me to be attracted to women, I had to rethink this and ask these questions about, okay, if I'm attracted to guys the rest of my life, am I called to lifelong celibacy? Should I be in a relationship? What does this mean? And I found that the church was not very good at having these conversations on any side. So my goal is not to argue for a position on same-sex marriage, even though I certainly have a position, or to argue about what does this Bible passage mean or that Bible passage, although I can talk about that, and we have those conversations a lot. But to take a step further back from that and say, you know, there's this perception that exists that Christians are all homophobic and bigoted and hateful, and I don't think that's true, but it is the image the church has. And so there needs to be a better way of talking about these kinds of questions and looking at gay folks and LGBT folks as people, first and foremost, and not as issues.
I love that, and I think that's such a true, real statement, right? This idea that we should look at the LGBT community as people and not as a sort of abstract acronym, which is what you sort of see from the mainstream sort of Christian society. But the question is how do we take it to the next step? Like, how do we go that step further, right? And I guess I said the darkness is darkest before the dawn. But are we at the dawn, or is it a situation where there's going to be a lot of work, you think, before the church really comes around and has this eye-opening conversation with itself?
Yeah, I think we are seeing a lot of change happen, and there are things that I still want to see change. Certainly, a lot of things, but I'm very hopeful about the future. And I think one of the biggest things that we have to do is tell our stories. I came out with a book recently called "Torn: Rescuing the Gospel from the Gays versus Christians Debate," and it's a book that it deals with the Bible. It deals with the science of sexual orientation and all of those kinds of questions. But even more, it's about my story and the stories of other people that I've known who are caught in the culture war crossfire. And I think the more that we can share our stories, the more that we can say, here's my experience as an LGBT Christian, here's my experience as a Christian parent whose son just came out, here's my experience as a Christian who my best friend just came out to me and I'm trying to figure out what this means. And, or here's my experience as an LGBT person who's not a Christian but has heard hurtful messages from the church. The more we can tell our stories and see each other as people, the more we begin to realize, okay, we might disagree on how to interpret this Bible passage or whether the Bible even has any relevance to our lives, but we can love each other. And that's the thing, that Jesus called us first and foremost to love God and love our neighbors. And so if we can't do that, then all of the other biblical arguments and everything else are moot. Because that's the number one thing that we're called to do, is to be loving. And that's where we've been dropping the ball. But I hear more and more Christians, including Christians in the evangelical world that I come from, recognizing that this is something that we need to fix, that we need to be more focused on how do we love folks, even in the midst of the disagreements that we might have.
I love that. I think that's such a powerful statement, is that this idea that, the greatest commandment in the Bible is this idea of love your neighbor as yourself. And if Christians can't conquer that one particular commandment, then, how can they sort of live this so-called quasi-Christian life? And I think that's really powerful, this idea that we really do have to have the bold and honest conversations. But sometimes, especially I think in the Black community, having that conversation is by far the hardest thing to do. And I think that is what sort of causes a lot of our brothers and sisters out there to sort of live, this life of secrecy and this life of lies. It's sort of, and it's harmful for not only them, but it's harmful for everybody around them. And I think, sadly, sometimes the church is a perpetuation of that harm. And it's one of those things that, for me personally, it bothers me. But I think it's just one of those things that's where the conversation needs to happen, is how do we sort of, stop the perpetuation of the harm?
Yeah, I mean, that's where you get the problem of say, the music minister in the church, or the organist who...
Speak on it.
Everybody knows, everybody knows, but nobody wants to talk about it. And we need to be able to talk about it. But it's not, pretending that this is not something that's going on isn't helpful. But also just coming at folks with, I've had so many of my Christian friends come to me and say, well, have you read what the Bible says? 1 Corinthians 6:9 says such and such and such and such. And it's like, yeah, I've spent lots of time reading these passages. I could quote them to you backwards and forwards in the original languages. I've spent a lot of time studying them. But before we get into that argument, maybe I could tell you a little bit about my story. Maybe I could tell you what I've been through. Maybe you could tell me what you've been through. And maybe, we can ask that music minister what he's been through and get to know this side of each other that we often are afraid to talk about. That's really how we build these bridges. That's how we make change. And as long as there are folks in the church willing to say, la 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 la, we're not going to see that change happen.
I love that, and I want to go back to something you said earlier, which I think is such a powerful, powerful statement. Is like, in your own story, you thought, as you were sort of dealing and battling with your own sexuality as an individual, you sort of came like, am I going to be celibate? Am I going to live this? How am I going to deal with this? And I think a lot of times, people sort of think that this is the lifestyle, at least, is a choice. And I think if you talk to folks who live this lifestyle, I don't think anybody wants the hatred and the shame and the neglect of their family or their community. And I think that is I think that's one of those powerful part about telling your story, is this ideal that, in telling your story, people realize that it's not something that, like, I didn't wake up, nobody wakes up one morning and decides that they want to be LGBT or Q, for that matter.
That's right. Yeah, it was the last thing I would ever have wanted. I mean, I was the good Southern Baptist kid. Like I said, I was God boy. I was the last person who would ever want to be gay. I was desperate to not be gay, and there is an element of choice in how we live. I mean, I can choose whether to be celibate the rest of my life. I can choose whether to date, whether to get married. I could choose to marry someone I'm not attracted to. You know, I could marry a woman I'm not attracted to. I could marry a man. I have these choices, and those are choices that I make. But I can't choose who I'm attracted to. And a lot of times I find people make all sorts of assumptions. As soon as I use that word gay, which is a word I use to mean someone who's attracted to the same sex, regardless of what they choose to do about it. But as soon as I say that, people have all these images. People talk about, quote unquote, the gay lifestyle. As a friend of mine who's a straight woman married to a pastor says, there is no gay lifestyle. She says, Madonna and I are both straight women, but we live very different lifestyles. There are many different gay lifestyles, as there are many different straight lifestyles. And ultimately, each person makes a lot of choices about what they're going to do, how they're going to live. But it's not the choices that people assume. As a gay man, I don't spend all of my time dancing shirtless in clubs, getting drunk, or something like that, which is this assumption people have. I have a very boring lifestyle, actually. I'm single. I run a nonprofit organization. I'm an author. I'm a blogger. I spend a lot of time sitting at my computer looking very, very boring. But I'm gay, and I'm a Christian. So
I couldn't think of a better way to end it. We don't think you're boring here on The Fowler Show, but thank you so much for being with us. We really appreciate it. If there's anything we can do here at The Fowler Show to help this movement, you let us know. We'll be right back on the show after this break. Don't go anywhere.